Well, well, it gives me great pleasure to welcome everybody to the SASIG group. Lovely to see familiar faces and also to see less familiar ones. But Annalisa's face for me is a very familiar one, and one that I've delighted in getting to know over the last couple of years. Her background is remarkable, really, because she started off as an economist. We don't usually see that running into the arts. We sometimes see it as rather separate, but that was her first career, was in investment banking. And like many people, her visual art was there in the background and really materialized in a marvelous form in the University of Westminster, where it was developed, and then went on into the Royal Academy's summer exhibition in 2022. But she wasn't content with simply painting or being an artist of some kind, but was fascinated, and always has been, on what goes on behind the making of art. This was helped by the MSc she took in anthropology of religions at LSE, and this has led her to be with the three of us setting up this group. From looking at how creativity works, she became very interested in how spirituality works in the processes of creativity, and very much in the rising tide of spiritual but not religious. Now we have this phenomenon in our society: spiritual but not religious, and spiritual and religious. And of course, actually, some people who are religious but not spiritual, which is another interesting descriptor. And she's published articles in this area and is gradually developing a very good profile in this area as an independent scholar. And she's now doing a training course on being a holistic integrated creative arts therapy practitioner with Soul School. And she's doing a lot of work on Abramović's paintings as well, but looking particularly at artists who have seen their work as spiritual in some way. In this group, we've not actually set out how we define spiritual. And I think the interesting thing is that Annalisa has shown, I think, possibly the way forward for many artists, which is to define it in a way which fits with how you work. And it's with great joy that I look forward to hearing her talking about where this very complex journey has taken her and where she is now as a spiritual but not religious person who is an art maker. Over to you, Annalisa.
Thank you, June. That was a really lovely introduction. I just want to make sure everybody is muted. So if you don't mind, I'm going to mute everyone so we reduce background noise. And I'm going to start sharing my presentation. Here, share screen. Share. Can everybody see it? Yes? Okay. So as first of all, I'm very excited about talking about Marina Abramović's life work. This talk was timed in anticipation of her, well, it's going to be a whole 3 months of Marina Abramović in London, actually. She fits very well with my personal interest or focus of research, as June mentioned, which is to justify or demonstrate that art is a legitimate context for to have a spiritual life, either as a spiritual practice or to experience spiritual experiences, mystical experiences, which of course would be the apotheosis of a spirit, the vast range of experiences that one can have spiritually. So I want to take the discourse of art beyond the aesthetic and develop and actually bring the arts back to the spiritual and the religious, where it originally, where they originally met. They were two sides of the same coin, religions and art. And I feel that Marina Abramović incarnates the artist shaman, i.e. the spiritual artist that has used art not only as a means of spiritual transformation for herself, but she's now bringing her own method to the contemporary audience, which is in the West, at least, generally non-spiritual and non-religious. So especially in the art world. So for me, she's paradigmatic for my personal research and for my personal arguments. And so I hope that you will agree with me by the end of my presentation that she does represent a paradigmatic case. Before I start, I would like to just give you a brief introduction to what's going to happen in London over the next 3 months. So the Abramović season is going to be kicked off at the Royal Academy on the 23rd of September. And my husband and I are co-sponsors of this exhibition, so I'm particularly tied to this one. And it will run for 3 months until the 1st of January 2024. She will be present, not every day, of course. She doesn't do long durational performances anymore, but there will be students of her that will reenact some of her performances. So you need to check the schedule to see what's on when you book your tickets, if you are going to see it. Then south of the river, South Bank Center will also have 4 days of performances by Marina Abramović's students. Then on the 1st of October, she will introduce Marina Abramović, a visual biography, her new book. And finally, if you are theater lovers, she will be at the Colosseum, London Colosseum, in November with the ENO that will present her theater piece, 7 Deaths of Maria Callas. So that's just to give you an idea of what's going to happen over the next 3 months in London. My presentation is structured in 3 parts. First, I want to introduce Dr. Denita Benishek, who provided the framework that I used in my article and in my dissertation at the Anthropology of Religion to reframe Marina's as an artist shaman. So I'm going to look at Marina's personal and artistic development through this particular lens. Then I will look at her biographical history, because that is important to discuss this particular designation. And then finally, I will look at her artistic career and her spiritual development to conclude that she's not only, in my opinion, or my conclusion, an artist shaman, but she's now turned into a spiritual figure for contemporary audiences. So I'd like to start with anthropology, because that's my field, but also because Marina has been in a conversation with anthropology from the very beginning. So from her students' years, she used to attend anthropology lessons, even though she didn't study anthropology. So she's always been interested in anthropology. And Talal Asad is a very important scholar of religion, of anthropology of religion. He's Islamic, sorry, he's a Muslim, and he suggested that as we have a branch called anthropology of religion, So we should have another branch of anthropology for secularism. So he saw secularism as another type of specialization that anthropologists today should study. And in his account of what he would formulate, if he had to write like a program for an anthropology of secularism, within this discourse, he suggested that today's secular scholars, tend to see shamans, traditional shamans, as inspired artists. And equally, today's art scholars tend to talk about contemporary artists as shaman. And so in a secular paradigm, there is this connection or this mirroring between artists and shamans. And what connects the two categories that we could consider cognate categories is that for both categories, inspiration and creativity rest on spiritual practices and vice versa. Spiritual practices rest on inspiration and creativity. What Dr. Benishek has done with her dissertation is to address and refine Assad's ideas. And she, in my opinion, brought this discourse forward by recognizing that what Talal Assad is talking about is what she calls a fuzzy subset, which is the shaman-like set of artists. But the artist shaman is a far stricter, narrower, and more rigorous definition, requires a more rigorous definition. So in her, first of all, who is Denita Benishek? She's a multimedia artist, mental health counselor, and an initiated shaman. So she would fit very well in our group. She provides psychotherapy and shamanic counseling for artists and creative individuals. And she uses psychophysical techniques such as EMDR to treat and resolve traumatic experiences. In case you don't know what EMDR is, it's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is a therapy used for to treat trauma. And apparently is very good. It works very well. So she applied for a PhD at Saybrook University. And in 2012, she submitted her dissertation called Contemporary Artists as Shamans, an Archival Exploration, under Professor Stanley Krippner's supervision. Now, I have also had tutoring from Professor Krippner before I knew about Denita Benishek. So that's a coincidence, but it's a telling coincidence. In this work, she explored the nature and the extent of similarities between artists and shaman. And she came with, together with Stanley, to this definition of shaman. Stanley Krippner is the authority of shamanism in transpersonal psychology. He spent decades working with shamans. So he's one of the major sources of knowledge about shamanism. And her definition, she finally came to this very strict definition, not strict, but rigorous definition. So is a socially designated spiritual practitioner who obtains information in ways not available to the shaman's community through the voluntary regulation of the shaman's own attention, which is used for the benefit of the shaman's community and its members. So I broke it down into 5 individual, she calls them constructs, but you could think of them as conditions. So in order to be designated as a shaman, an artist has to fulfill all 5 of these conditions. So let's now move to Marina's story. My source is her book, her autobiographical book, Walking Through Walls. And I'm going to spend some time talking about her childhood, because I think understanding the the psychological development of an artist on one hand, but also of a shaman, is important in this context. She was born in Belgrade in what was then Yugoslavia, under Tito's communist regime, and on the 30th of November 1946.
Annalisa, we can't see your slides full screen. I did send you a message, but you haven't.
Yes, Judith, I decided not to do full screen because.
Oh, okay, no worries. Thank you.
Because I want to read my notes, and if I do full screen, I can't see my notes. So sorry about that. Her parents were war heroes, and they were awarded the Order of People's Heroes. And because of their bravery during the Second World War against the Nazis, they were given important positions within the regime. And Marina describes her parents as red bourgeoisie, which, it's a bit like the Orwell's novel of Animals Farm, because not all communists were equal. Some were more equals than others. And so they lived in relative wealth and in relative comfort compared to most people in Yugoslavia. For example, they were given a 1920s apartment in the center of Belgrade, which used to belong to a wealthy Jewish family, and it was requisited by the Nazis during the war. And so they had a very prestigious dwelling for a communist country. However, their marriage wasn't very happy. They fought all the time. Marina describes it as like war. And both her parents were particularly strong people. Her mother was nominated the director of the Museum of Art and the Revolution because she descended from a wealthy family. Before the war, she was educated in Switzerland, and she was a very sophisticated woman. She loved the arts, she loved ballet, she loved the opera, and she thought that art was holy. So that was her role in the communist regime. But she also was a very difficult woman. She developed, she suffered of obsessive compulsive disorders. She was very, very strict with herself, but also with her family. She claimed that she could go to the dentist without having any anesthesia because she could just suffer and not complain. And so she raised Marina in an extremely disciplined way. She was a disciplinarian. And that meant very often physical and psychological abuse on this child. What happened when she became pregnant with Marina is that she had an early delivery, so the baby was premature, and Marina was born quite sickly as a child, as a baby. During the birth, there were complications. The placenta was retained, and so the mother developed sepsis, and she spent a year in hospital. For this reason, the baby was separated from her mother and given to other people to be raised in her first year. In fact, initially she was given to a nanny, but then, or more than a nanny, was a maid. And then the grandmother realized that the baby wasn't doing well, and so she took her with her. This is the maternal grandmother, and she lived with her maternal grandmother for the first 6 years of her life. So she had a very difficult relationship with her mother. She never demonstrated to Marina any love. And Marina always tried to win her respect, but overall she was an oppressive and disciplinarian parent. Therefore, she developed a much closer relationship to her father, who gained this love for the simple reason that he never punished Marina like her mother. And they became best friends. However, her father had also a flawed character. Unlike her mother, he came from a poor family of warriors. They were all military men who died in different wars and fought against the Nazis. He wasn't educated or sophisticated. And his biggest weakness were women. So he was a philanderer. And this caused a lot of problems within the marriage. And of course, the fighting between the two spouses affected Marina's as well. So eventually, he left the marriage when Marina was 17 to go with his lover of the moment. And Marina felt betrayed by her father because she was left alone with her mother. The only positive attachment or relationship that she had in her family came from her maternal grandmother, Milica, who was a very special woman. As I said, she spent the first 6 years of her life with her, and her grandmother was very religious. She was a very pious Orthodox Christian. She went to church every day and she prayed every day. And the days had a very rhythmic pace. So she had all these rituals that she followed every day that gave great peace to the place and Marina. Marina, of course, went to church with her grandmother every day, and she learned all about the saints. Her grandmother was also quite superstitious, and she saw clairvoyants quite regularly and brought Marina with her to see them. She could read fortunes using coffee beans, and she loved interpreting dreams. So all this, obviously, Marina absorbed all these habits and behaviors, and she felt that they were signs and rituals. The signs and rituals were a kind of spirituality for her. And she said they also connected me to my inner life and dreams. So her initial experience of spirituality came from her grandmother. She also had a brother with whom she had quite a difficult relationship. First of all, because she returned to her parents when he was born. She was already 6 then. And because he was a boy, and this is the Baltic culture, boys are considered the favorite children. So she was very jealous of him because he was treated differently. He was treated as the favorite child. But he also suffered of epilepsy. So he got a lot of attention from everyone else. And so now I'd like to talk about what indigenous societies, shamanic societies, would consider signs of shamanhood. They usually look at 3 different kinds of signs: physical, psychological, and behavioral. Marina showed several unusual physical ailments or signs that could be interpreted as an indication of a shamanhood nature. First of all, as I mentioned already, she was prematurely born with a difficult delivery, because of retained placenta. She developed a blood disorder that doctors could never figure out what it was. So it wasn't leukemia and it wasn't hemophilia. So they decided that it was psychosomatic. She felt she had a very disharmonious body, especially when she was a teenager. She had flat feet for which she had to wear orthopedic shoes. She felt she was too tall and skinny. She was called a giraffe by her schoolmates. She had to wear thick glasses, of which she was very embarrassed. She also said that her nose was too big for her baby face and that she had a big ass. So she was very embarrassed of her body. And on top of that, she was quite clumsy because of probably the orthopedic shoes and everything else. And she said of herself, in my mind, I was the ugliest kid in my school, extraordinarily ugly. I was thin and tall, and the kids called me giraffe. So if you can imagine, I had skinny legs, orthopedic shoes, and ugly glasses. And I had a baby face with an impossibly big nose. My nose was grown up, but my face was not. I felt hideous. And so she didn't have much confidence as a teenager. And finally, as soon as puberty began, she started suffering of migraines, which her mother also suffered of. And of this particular ailment, she said, it was the beginning of my education in accepting and overcoming pain and fear. So this is a theme that runs throughout her career as a person and as an artist. Then they look also at indigenous shamanic people also look at personality predispositions and behaviors to determine if a child might be a shaman. So Marina displays several of these shamanic traits. For example, she had strong transliminal traits such as vivid dreams when she slept. She was fascinated by magic and the spiritual world. She had a very vivid imagination that came alive, especially when she read books. And she said that the reality of the books and her dreams to her felt more real than her real reality. She also had beliefs in the paranormal. For example, she believed in clairvoyance. She was very introverted as a child. She spent most of her childhood reading. She loved what she called extreme narratives, particularly Proust, Kafka, Rasputin, Camus, and Rilke. They were her favorite authors. She was very lonely. She was shy. She said she couldn't talk to strangers because she was so shy. She was hyper self-conscious. But she was still a very intelligent and very imaginative child. So she was a very creative child. But they were during her puberty, she started displaying what one might call shamanic illness. She said that she was her teenage years were desperately awkward and unhappy. She was depressed. She was self-harmed, and when she turned 16, she said she committed an accidental suicidal gesture by cutting her wrists while listening to Mozart, but she didn't intend to commit suicide. She was just extremely depressed and extremely sad, and so it was a gesture. And her maternal grandmother saved her by taking her to the hospital, but fortunately, she didn't cut the main arteries. But the thing that pinched it for me was that she had spontaneous paranormal experiences from a very early age. So when she was punished by her mother and locked in the placard, which is a very deep and dark cupboard that a lot of Serbian houses have, she was scared of the darkness. She was scared of this cupboard. But once she was inside of it, she said she was visited by ghosts and spirits, and she wasn't afraid of them. So she said, my entire childhood was full of spirits and invisible beings. It was shadows and dead people that I could see. Another meaningful experience she had at 24, I think, in 1970. A friend of hers committed suicide after threatening of committing suicide several times, and people stopped believing her. And on the day of the funeral, she said that her ghost came to visit her, and she saw it as clear as day. And this visitation really upset her. She was shaken by it, and she felt her presence in the house for several days after the funeral. And eventually she left and went back to Belgrade. She was doing a post diploma course or training, and she quit it and went back to Belgrade. But she also had experiences of telepathy and premonitions in dreams while living with the Aboriginal tribes in Australia. I'm not going to try and read the names because they're very difficult to read. But she spent 6 months in Australia living with Aboriginal people, with Ulai. And during this time, she was living with the women. And because they didn't speak, they started, eventually she started communicating, I don't know, through telepathically. She said that she could hear their voices in her mind. So these, of course, are Psi experiences, and they, to me, they indicate that she does have a shamanic constitution. These experiences brought her to develop her own metaphysical theory about reality. She said, "I didn't know then, and I don't know now, who or what creates this invisible world, but I do know that it can be entirely visible. I became convinced that when we die, the physical body dies, but its energy doesn't disappear. It takes different forms. I came to believe in the idea of parallel realities. I think that the reality we see now is a certain frequency, and that we're all on the same frequency. So we're visible to each other, but that it's possible to change frequencies, to enter a different reality. And I think that there are hundreds of these realities." So this is her first, she came to this, metaphysical or ontological theory through her own experiences. This was not given to her by some dogmatic beliefs of a religious system or a cult leader. She developed these ideas because of her direct experiences, her direct paranormal experiences. And therefore, it could be considered empirical in the sense that it's based on subjective experience. I now want to look at her formal art education very briefly, to show how she developed as an artist. So she decided to become an artist at a very early age. She was 6 or 7, and her mother was very supportive of her ambition. Her motivation to be an artist was principally because she craved freedom. And freedom of expression was the only freedom that she had left, because under her mother and under the oppressive communist system, there was no personal freedom. So the only people who could enjoy some freedom were artists. And so therefore she started painting, and she had a home studio, of course. And her first paintings were her dreams, her vivid dreams that usually were in color green or blue. She then joined the Art Academy in Belgrade. She attained the professional title of academic painter in 1970. But soon she became dissatisfied with the two-dimensionality of painting. And as you know, in 1968, there was a lot of turmoil, student protests everywhere, from Paris to Belgrade to the United States. And there was also a lot of ferment in the arts. So in the 70s, we have the birth of conceptual art. performance art, and in Italy, they developed arte povera, or rediscovered arte povera. So she became very interested in this new art, and with another group, with other 5 artists, she founded Group 70 in 1968, which was a performance group. And they started experimenting at the Student Cultural Center of Belgrade. And this was her way of freeing herself from her mother, the oppressive communist regime, and the art academy. This is Group 70, so it's 5 men and Marina. And she started reaching out to all international galleries in the United States and in Europe, because she was desperate to leave Belgrade and her mother. And in 1972, Richard DeMarco came to Belgrade to meet them, and then invited them to the Edinburgh Festival that he curated, which was an avant-garde festival. And I think 5 of them went, only 1 didn't go. And this is the beginning, this is her big break, basically. This is the beginning of her performance art career. For this festival, she devised a performance called Rhythm 10, which consisted in stabbing a knife between her fingers, 10 knives, 10 times, twice. So doing this ritual twice. She describes this as she describes this idea in these terms. Rhythm 10 was absolutely crazy. It was based on a drinking game played by Russian and Yugoslav peasants. You spread your fingers out on a wooden bar or table and step down a sharp knife fast in the spaces between your fingers. Every time you miss and cut yourself, you have to take another drink. The drunker you get, the more likely you are to stab yourself. Like Russian roulette, it is a game of bravery and foolishness and despair and darkness, the perfect Slavic game. So she does this performance, and she said that the crowd stared dead silent. And a very strange feeling came over me, something I had never dreamt of. It was as if electricity was running through my body, and the audience and I had become one, a single organism. The sense of danger in the room had united the onlookers and me in that moment. The here and now and nowhere else. That thing that each of us lives with, and that you are your own life, your own little self privately. Once you step into the performance space, you are acting from a higher self, and it's not you anymore. It's not the you know, it's something else. It was as if I had become, at the same time, a receiver and transmitter of huge Tesla energy. The fear was gone, the pain was gone. I had become a Marina whom I didn't know yet. So I think this is a great description, because she's basically describing an altered state of consciousness, or a spiritual experience, or an awakening experience. She's basically not herself anymore. She's something else, something that she didn't know she was. She talks about energy, psychic energy. She talks about the here and now, being present in the moment. She talks about the unity of time, the past and the present. So these are all concepts that we read again and again in spiritual traditions, but also as what people experience during a transcendental experience. I want to read another paragraph, because it's relevant. She said, I knew I'd succeeded in creating an unprecedented unity of time present and time past with random errors. I had experienced absolute freedom. I had felt my body was without boundaries, limitless. That pain didn't matter. that nothing mattered at all, and it intoxicated me. I was drunk from the overwhelming energy that I'd received. That was the moment I knew I had found my medium. No painting, no object that I could make could ever give me that kind of feeling. And it was a feeling I knew I would have to seek out again and again and again. So this was basically the beginning of her career as a performance artist. I just want to make a small parenthesis, going back to anthropology, to interpret her first performance through the lens of shamanic cultures. Anthropologist Charles Stepanov, who studied the Tuvan people in Siberia, mentioned that there are consistent accounts of previous shamans' generations stabbing themselves and surviving, even shooting themselves with a gun and then surviving. And these accounts go back to the 17th century, when Russians sent expeditions in Siberia, Cossack exhibitions. And again, they report of shamans who cut themselves and drank their own blood. Furthermore, he says that for Tuvan people, the herdsmen, not the intellectuals, fairly enough, they believe that shamans are born anywhere in the world. They are not a cultural product. So for them, calling yourself a shaman is not cultural appropriation. If you are born with the constitution of a shaman, you are a shaman no matter where you're born. Of course, shamans have to go through initiation rites and they have to prove that they're shamans, but constitutionally, they can be born anywhere. So Rhythm 10 made me think of these rituals, and I suggest that perhaps Marina was designing these rituals, which involved stabbing and knives and a lot of blood, that were kind of tests to see whether she did have this constitution, although she wasn't obviously aware. I mean, she wasn't, you know, that idea wasn't in her head, so there was no awareness. She then developed 4 more performances, all called Rhythm. The one that I want to talk briefly is Rhythm 5, because for 2 reasons. The first one is that she used the star as a symbol, for which later, when she became a celebrity, was used as an accusation of witchcraft against her. But the reason why, for me, this is a relevant moment is because she loses consciousness while she was enveloped in the flames. And this thing pissed her off. She was very upset that she had lost consciousness while doing a performance. Even though the performance was a success, she was still disappointed in the fact that she had lost control over her consciousness. And I will come back to this later. The other one I want to talk, I would like to say briefly, but it's difficult to be brief about Rhythm 0. This is a performance that she did in Naples at the Gallery Studio Mora in 1974. And in this performance, she did nothing. She was completely passive, like a doll or a mannequin. So the performance didn't come from the artist, but from the audience. And the audience was confronted with this situation, which they have never seen before, they never experienced before. She chose 72 objects that she laid out on a table, and the participants could use any object and do anything they wanted to her, and she would have not reacted, like a doll. And the duration was 6 hours, from 8 o'clock to 2 o'clock in the morning. These were the only instructions. There was nothing nothing else. It was completely up to the participants to make something of it. So she said, in the beginning, not much happened, but eventually, as the evening turned into the late night, a certain air of sexuality arose in the room. After 3 hours, one man cut my shirt apart with his scissors and took it off. People manipulated me in various poses. Things got more intense. A couple of people picked me up and carried me around. They put me on the table, spread my legs, stuck a knife in the table close to my crotch. Someone stuck pins into me. Someone poured a glass of wine over my head. Someone cut my neck and with the knife and sucked my blood. I still have the scar. Then there was a man, and I'm going to skip a few things, that really scared me. Nobody else, nothing else did, but he did. After a while, he put the bullet in the pistol and put the pistol in my right hand. He moved the pistol towards my neck and touched the trigger. There was a murmur in the crowd, and someone grabbed him. A scuffle broke out. The little man was hustled out of the gallery, and the piece continued. In fact, the audience became more and more active, as if in a trance. So this is, from a social perspective and a psychological perspective, a really interesting experiment. At the end of the 6 hours, the gallerist arrived at 2 o'clock and announced that the performance was over. And so she came back to herself. And instead of staring in the empty space, she looked at people. As soon as she looked at people, they got scared and ashamed of what they had done and ran off without talking to her. So this performance really, really shook her. Like the next day, she said she woke up with a bunch of gray hair. And she realized in that moment that the audience could kill you. So something happened during that performance that completely changed the participants. And this is what she said about it. What had happened while they were there, quite simply, was performance. And the essence of performance is that the audience and the performer make the piece together. I wanted to test the limits of how far the public would go if I didn't do anything at all. Human beings are afraid of very simple things. We fear suffering, we fear mortality. What I was doing in Rhythm Zero, as in all my other performances, was staging these fears for the audience, using their energy to push my body as far as possible. In the process, I liberated myself from my fears. And as this happened, I became a mirror for the audience. If I could do it, they could do it too. So I think first of all, this is in essence the difference between performance art and theater. Performance art is unpredictable, and it depends on the relationship between the artist and the audience. Every performance will be different because you cannot predict how the audience is going to react. In theater, everything is scripted. So this is one of the first of the main differences between the two. The audience has agency. Their behavior is spontaneous, it's unpredictable, and is also, I add, culturally determined, because she chose a particular place for this performance, but I bet that if she had done it in Denmark, she would have probably obtained a different reaction from the participants. So this performance taught her a very important lesson about performance art. The last performance I want to talk about is Thomas Lips in 1975. This performance is quite extreme. I'm going to read you the instructions. I slowly eat a kilo of honey with a silver spoon. I slowly drink a liter of red wine out of a crystal glass. I break the glass with my right hand. I cut a 5-pointed star on my stomach with a razor blade. I violently whip myself until I no longer feel any pain. I lay down, sorry, my phone is. I lay down on a cross made of ice blocks. The heat of a suspended heater pointed at my stomach causes the start to bleed, the rest of my body behind to freeze. I remain on the ice cross for 30 minutes until the public interrupts the piece by removing the ice blocks from underneath me. Duration, 2 hours. So again, this is another extreme performance piece where pain is excruciating. And this is why I want to talk about this particular piece. She said, the pain was like a wall I had walked through and come out on the other side. So there's a point where during the weeping, she stops feeling the pain. And it is in that moment that she has this transcendence. Once again, she had to be rescued by the public because she had cut herself accidentally when she broke the glass. And that cut was so deep that she needed 6 stitches. But she hadn't noticed because she was in this trance. And so once again, she's disappointed that she couldn't carry the performance throughout because she's lost control. She's lost control of her awareness. And I want to, in 2011, she wrote a decalogue for artists. And this is what she said about pain and artists. She instructs artists that they should suffer. From suffering comes the best work. Suffering brings transformation. Through suffering, the artist transcends his spirit. So I just want to make a reflection here. In her performances and in her early performance career, she's using pain and homeostatic disruption in order to reach an altered state or what she calls higher self. So pain and suffering at this point of Karina's development are the main portal to an altered state of consciousness. So, and these performances are also trials to test the limit of her body, her mind, and her consciousness, similar to Siberian shamans. But the fact that she lost control over her awareness, or she passed out, sent her off to a very long journey into different spiritual traditions around the world. So she practiced and studied many spiritual traditions or mystical traditions like Buddhism, Sufism, shamanism, yoga, and various animistic cultures, both in Australia, in Latin America, and in Southeast Asia. So, and she did much of this exploration with her partner Ulay, that she partnered with for over 10 years, and did several performances together. So they trained themselves to learn to control their states of consciousness during the performance. And specifically, they trained their ability to sustain pain. But the tradition that most affected her in terms of teaching these lessons to the Western audience is Vipassana meditation. And she translated it or adapted it to a Western art world, calling it the Abramović method. I picked some pictures here from her website, Cleaning the House, which is a 5 days retreat using the Abramović method. And the ingredients of this method are fasting, meditation, slowing everything down, silence, and importantly, a connection with nature. As you can see, these are done in a group. And she started developing this method in the 80s and 90s to teach art students. And this was her main source of income in those years. And this, I picked this picture because this is Lady Gaga. And Lady Gaga became one of her students. So she's a Marina Abramović's acolyte. And this exercise is counting the rice, which is a totally pointless exercise, but that's the point of it, that is pointless. So it's meant to teach you a lesson. The objectives of this training was to develop endurance, concentration, perception, self-control, willpower, and confrontation with mental and physical limits. But the ultimate purpose of it was to generate a burst of energy at the end of it and a flow of a new idea. But what also happened was that the participants developed a strong sense of unity among themselves. And this is an interesting phenomenon, which can be explained by another anthropologist, Victor Turner, who specialized in rituals. He did a lot of work in rituals and developed this concept of existential or spontaneous communitas. This communitas is a phenomenon that happens during counterculture happenings. They are characterized by transience and spontaneity. Participants experience a state of equality, comradeship, and common humanity. And all the societal structures are left outside of this environment. So people meet each other at the same level. And they are often transformative experiences for the participants. He said that, and this is important, is a fact in everyone's experience, and they are central to religion, literature, drama, and art. So these four contexts are the ones that can develop these existential communitas. He also said that it goes to the heart of each person beings, where they find something profoundly communal and shared. So what Victor Turner describes here about religious rituals or initiation rituals that happen in indigenous cultures or in cultures everywhere around the world is particularly relevant to Marina Performance's work where her method is utilized. I'm going to skip now basically to the end of her career in 2010, because this is another turning point for her own development, both as a person as an artist. In 2010, she was invited by the Museum of Modern Art in New York for a retrospective. And she devised this performance, which was very simple. She basically suggested to have the visitors of the museum sitting in front of her for as long as they wished. And initially there were 2 chairs and a table, and then she got rid of the table and there were only 2 chairs. So it was very basic, very stripped out of any props. It was just a very simple performance. But it was very taxing on her. She had to sit 8 hours a day from the 14th of March to the 31st of May, uninterruptedly. And during this time, she could only sit. She couldn't stretch her legs. She didn't have bathroom breaks. She didn't drink. She didn't eat. She couldn't yawn. She couldn't sneeze. She couldn't cough. She just had to be present. And during this time, the numbers are quite astounding, actually, because the MoMA director thought it was going to be a flop, because this is New York. People are not going to sit in front of the artist. It's too personal. And instead, there were 850,000 people coming and standing in the hall, in the atrium. The Flickr page that the MoMA set up had 600,000 visits. And their live feed was registered 800,000 hits. The performance lasted 736 hours, and a total of 1,545 people sat in front of her, including many celebrities like Lady Gaga, Björk, Marisa Tomei, Lou Reed, Alan Rickman, James Franco, Sharon Stone, Isabella Rossellini, and many more. And Ulay surprised her. He sat in front of her, and I recommend watching the video because it's very moving, and it's been seen over 20 million times on YouTube. So it's a very well-known video. Then also the documentary that was filmed about this particular performance won the Best Documentary Award at the Berlin Festival. So this performance was an absolute public hit. She became famous overnight. She came into the public awareness in a way that she never was before. In the past, before 2010, she was very well known in the art world, but now she was known to the general public. What she experienced during this performance changed her once again. She said that she could feel and mirror people's pain, that she could see the energy that people carried with themselves. And she felt a deep and profound empathy for strangers and a feeling of unconditional love, which usually is called agape. And this is what she said about love. Suddenly, out of nowhere in the world, this overwhelming need had appeared. The responsibility was enormous. I was there for everyone who was there. A great trust had been given to me. Hearts were open to me, and I opened my heart in return, time after time after time. My physical pain was one thing, but the pain in my heart, the pain of pure love, was far greater. The sheer quantity of love, the unconditional love of total strangers, was the most incredible feeling I've ever had. I don't know if this is art, I said to myself. I don't know what this is or what art is. And about art, she said, this performance went beyond performance. This was life. Should art be isolated from life? I began to feel more and more strongly that art must be life. It must belong to everybody. I felt more powerful than ever that what I had created had a purpose. And then finally, she said about suffering, that because of her notoriety or sudden celebrity, she became heavily criticized by the media for being a star and for hanging around with stars. And she said, but I didn't ask for it. And what she said is, the perception is that an artist has to suffer. I've suffered enough in my lifetime. So here Marina draws a line in the sand and said, I've suffered enough, now I can move forward. And from this, she then devised a new piece for the Serpentine Gallery in London, which is called 512 Hours. And in this performance, the artist doesn't suffer at all. In fact, she becomes a teacher for the Western audience. And it's not the art world anymore. This is the public. This is the general public. This performance, if you call it performance, was free. Anybody could enter it. They had 124,000 people participating. It ran from June 11th for 64 days for a total of 512 hours. And in this particular work, she basically taught her method to the participants, to the general public. And some of the exercises that we saw before were incorporated in this setting. For example, there was a certain level of sensory deprivation, as you can see in these pictures. So blindfolding and headphones to cut off any noise. Silence was used as well as a form of sensory deprivation, and a slowing down of movements. Marina, at the beginning of the performance, was guiding people, was instructing people. But as the performance went on, she realized that she didn't have to do that people were showing each other what to do. And so they were learning organically from each other. They connected to each other. And by the end of the performance, she said she wasn't even teaching or guiding any. She became a participant herself. And this is interesting to me because it's almost as if the artist has removed her ego from this situation. She wasn't the artist anymore. She wasn't the center of attention anymore. She wasn't the person giving instructions. She was just one of them. People reported very beneficial things from this experience, at least the ones that were open-minded enough. They felt, they attested a feeling of connection, not only with themselves, but also with others. Again, this idea of communitas. And it is essentially a meditative experience. And I recommend watching the Intelligence Squared talk between Marina Abramović and Will Gompertz, who interviewed her in 2014. And it's very, very interesting. It's a very interesting interview to watch. I can paste the link on the chat later if you want. During this performance, we have another development in Marina's thinking. She said, this is the last day of this performance, and she wrote in her diary, "It was an important journey. I know this work is not ending now, but the beginning of something big and different. It's about humanity, humbleness, and collectivity. It's very simple. Maybe together we can change consciousness and transform the world, and we can start doing this anywhere." And then about art, she said, "There was something in those moments that made me feel all of my work over my whole career had been worth it. In 512 hours, I found proof of the transformative power of performance. I also understood that this was the time to transfer my own experience to everyone else, and that the only way to do this was by letting people see and feel those things for themselves." So I now come to my conclusions. I hope I have convinced you that Marina Abramović, not only, so she works as a spiritual artist, but she doesn't like the label of spiritual leader or worse, spiritualist, even though she does believe in spirits. But she wants to be called simply artist. She has the ability to communicate with spirits, and she believes in multidimensional realities vibrating at different frequencies that can be made visible. She also has the ability to regulate her own attention and enter altered states of consciousness on demand. And finally, today, she's now working to heal humanity from its disconnection and change our collective consciousness for a better world. So I think that Marina satisfies at least 4 of the 5 conditions that I read earlier by Denita Benishek. She's a spiritual practitioner who obtains information in ways not available to the shaman's community through the voluntary regulation of the shaman's own attention, which is used for the benefit of the shaman's community and its members, where the shaman's community originally was the art world and today is the general public. Now, Denita makes one exception to the first condition, which is it has to be socially designated. You can't make yourself a shaman. You have to be designated by your community. You can't just grab the title. So the exception is an implicit designation by the artist's own spiritual community, which in this case is the art world. She suggests that, I'm going to have to read this because it's quite wordy. She suggests that some of these processes, some of these art processes that are happening are similar to processes engaged in traditional shamanic rituals between the audience and the shaman. And if this is the case, then the art community has a family resemblance to the shamanic community. And for this, the audience, the art audience, could give a tacit kind of social designation to of a shaman to an artist, in which case the subset of artists who can be considered shamans is considerably larger. So a tacit designation allows us to enlarge the subset of artist shamans. Yes, that's my conclusion. I thought there was something else to say. So I think, I hope that I have demonstrated that Marina fits with Benishek's definition of artist shaman. This, of course, does not mean that Marina will agree to that title, because she's been very clear that she only wants to be called artist. But in a sense, she's confirming my own argument that art itself is the context, can be a context for spiritual life. And that because for her, there is no separation between the artist and the spiritual teacher. They are the same thing. And so for me, she's paradigmatic because she's the living proof, if you wish, that the arts can be a context for spirituality. And so I stop here. I think I went just over an hour. And I will leave you to open the Q&A. And I've put there some questions that are quite controversial about Marina Abramović. Not everybody agrees with, not necessarily my interpretation, but not everybody thinks that Marina is a positive figure. Some people think that she's actually a satanic figure. So this is the end of my presentation, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'm not gonna, I hope June or Lila are going to do the Q&A session for me.
Yes, I mean, thank you so much for giving us a lot of provocation, and certainly giving us some questions. Is there anyone who wants to take up the questioning that Annalisa has put in front of us, or anybody wants to make any comment about it at all? Are there? I can't see any hands up.
Or if you disagree, huh?
Ah, right. Come in. Matt GT.
Hi, hello. Thank you, Annalisa. It was really, really nice. I've got to say that I'm not really a fan of everything that she does or did, but one of the things that, because I come from a land close to where she come from, one of the things that I've noticed is that Abramović, I think that there is a kind of a Slavic existential cosmic loneliness within her that she brings. You know, that reminds me sometimes of this, like even the big composers, Tchaikovsky and everything, that is this kind of like a slow rolling questioning about life and death, etc. But it also makes me think that she is comparable in some way to 4 other very important spiritual Slavic and Slavic spiritual artists. I'm thinking about Kandinsky. I'm thinking about Warhol, who was Warlowska, and Mark Roscovici. I mean, they all 4 come from very similar period. They all come very similar spiritual yearning and changing sort of like the platform of art in general. But also they all deal with the fact that when they've got to explain internationally their own art, they use English, which is not their main language, and they've got a lot of difficulties. And we can see how Warhol used to go around not talking all the time. He only talked into his own sort of like a microphone and dictaphone that he was talking to his wife, he used to call her. And of course, Abramović, all her works are mainly silent, especially the artist is present. There is no language at all. So I'm wondering, and I don't know where I'm going with this, if you think that there is like a Slavic cosmic existential sadness actually that goes through her work.
Do you want to reply to that? I noticed that Leela's also nodding, and I just didn't know whether Leela wanted to put something in before you replied.
Yeah, maybe because it's an interesting thought, because I was thinking about Beuys, Joseph Beuys, who is German, and this also this feeling of isolation around his work, and introspection, and going within and communicating with an animal, or using very very basic materials. And yes, suffering is very much part of it. So I think definitely I always thought that there is something very Slavic or Eastern European about her atmosphere in general, about her work. Yeah.
Because it reminds me of the Iron Curtain, isn't it? So all the people, so they also like in a landing between. They are not Russia and they are not the West. So they're sort of like in this kind of like dictatorship kind of a vibe in between. And I think that that's influenced a lot of artists coming out. I don't know. I'm asking Annalisa, because I mean, of course, you I think also you've met her, so maybe you know more.
No, I completely agree with you, but I didn't research that particular aspect of her work because it didn't interest me, for my research. But of course, it informs it. There's no way that it doesn't, because a lot of her work, in fact, she other performances that I haven't presented here were a conversation with her Balkan inheritance, particularly one that she did for the Venice Biennale. I forgot the name of the. It's very grotesque, very, very grotesque. So she's definitely in conversation with her former country, Yugoslavia, that doesn't exist anymore. So she doesn't even. She's in terms of nationality, she says she's Yugoslavian, not Serbian. But of course, she was from Serbia. So communism was a major fracture in the history of those countries, because it tried to delete the past, including the spiritual traditions, including superstitions and everything that came from the past, to create this future that at the end didn't work. It failed. And so I think in terms of national identity, it's quite confusing for her today, because she was born in a certain situation, then communism failed. It's now not Yugoslavia anymore, now it's Serbia. And she left it all behind. She left Serbia when she was 24, I think, and never went back. I mean, she did go back, she did, but only briefly. She was never happy there.
Yeah, but I know people that the reason why they researched her, I actually met students like that the reason why they found her interesting is because they had roots, or their parents came from Yugoslavia. So for them, researching her was like looking for their own roots. yeah, I witnessed it, so I'm just sharing. Yeah,
Makes sense.
Just to contribute to this, I think in music, a lot of the language that's used for transcendence is drawing quite heavily on Christian sources. It may ditch notions of God, but the notion of the transcendent experience has a lot of similarities with the Christian mystics. And when we edited the book on music education, we had a contribution from Lithuania. And most of the people who are contributing to the book found this a very bizarre contribution because he wasn't in that at all, and reminded us that he had compulsorily not been able to go near a church or have any religious affiliation at all. Otherwise, he would lose his job. So in that particular book, we have this this one chapter from Lithuania, whereas all the others are from America and Western Europe, which sort of stands out as a very different view of spirituality from those cultures which have somehow or other maintained some sort of Christian tradition, even though the person themselves has abandoned it. And I think that's I think this is why I said what I did at the beginning, that we can't define spirituality, because how people do define spirituality depends on the culture which shaped their view of spirituality. And the communist states, or the former communist states, I think are fascinating studies in this respect. And we haven't done enough of it. And I'm so glad that we've had this. There's not enough material coming from former communist states, I think, to feed into that side of the debate. And so, I mean, I'm very grateful for your work in this area, and so on. And it relates to a certain extent to your questions about Satanism and witchcraft. Those terms, well, there's no definition of them. They're only cultural. They're only cultural things. There's nothing given about them at all. And in general, what Satanism and witchcraft mean, it's not the dominant culture at the time, and no more than that. I think, and as you rightly suggest, she was countercultural in a number of ways. I'm not sure that Turner was as countercultural as that. There were bits of Turner that are countercultural and bits which aren't. And Turner himself is clearly rooted in the Catholic view of Mass, and then takes it out into a cultural frame. But I mean, I think the notion of where spirituality goes in an aggressively atheist society, I think is a fascinating study that needs to be extended in all the arts, really. Isilt, do you want to develop your comment you've put something about her later work different from her earlier work. Would you like to come in and talk a little bit more about what you've put in the chat there, because some people may not be familiar with the range of her work?
Yes, I did a master's and I studied her work with a particular focus on her latter work, which I do find extremely central with the what we discussed about healing and meditation and the link to spirituality. I think for me, the initial work has when performance art grew in the 60s and 70s, it had a lot to do with the shock culture, really, that had the borderlines on violence. And to me, I think there's a bit of a border there between self-harm and performance, which I can't relate to very well. So, I just find, for me, I relate very differently to her work in latter years to my observations at the beginning, and that's very much a personal response from me, but I think there is something objective in it to that shift in herself as well, and maybe something that she had to go through herself based on maybe aspects of trauma from her youth and resolving that before coming to the latter part. So that was my observation there.
Yes, thank you for rooting it in the development of performing arts, because performance art came in from two dimensions. It came in from theatre and music, and also from the visual artists. And you're right, there was a desire in it that we see to shock, which I must admit, having lived through that period in music, I didn't find it easy. I can remember a group of young students in grotesque masks with musical instruments, moving around an audience, getting things like violins very close to their ears, making the most excruciating sounds on them. And somehow or other, this was to be regarded as art in some way. None of them knew why they were doing it when you asked them, because they were just, if you could shock, then it was art. So there was a naivety in that, I think. I'm not saying that Abramović was into that, but I think some of that early work that you showed us was very much in that context of, if it is shocking, then it is therefore profound. And I think people disagree as to whether to shock is profound or not. And probably it depends on the relationship with the individual person who's perceiving it, or the group of people, and so on. But thank you for bringing that contextualization in. Do you want to add anything to that, Annalisa?
I think that to answer someone, I forgot, to Ezilit comment earlier, I think Marina Abramović's work can be read in many, many ways, using many, many lenses. And I wanted to get away from the traditional contemporary art critique, which only looks at work in terms of materiality. And I wanted to reinterpret her work through this shamanistic lens, which was the result both of my anthropological studies and my personal interest of art as a spiritual context for the secular, for secular people, because we don't have any other context other than nature. So for me, she's that's why she's interesting to me. But of course, you know, you can read her work in many other ways. I mean, there's not one way of seeing it. Of course, she was looking to shock people, and she did. She was very successful. But what interested me in her biography wasn't so much the reverberance that she had in the art world, but she doesn't really talk about that, but how these performances changed her and changed the audience, and how these performances informed her ideas of what performance art is, what art is, and what is the role of the artist, because those are the things that to me are spiritual. It's not so much the political or social reading of her performances. Of course, there is all her performances were political. She was very critical of the communist regime. She was very critical of certain close-mindedness of her country and her people. She was heavily criticized by her own people in the 70s. She was called an exhibitionist. You know, she didn't have an easy life as an artist. This wasn't the American, you know, the United States. So for me, the fascinating aspect of that I got out of her book, her autobiography, was how art transformed her. Because if we are talking about spirituality as a kind of transformation, or, you know, something that transforms a person to a higher self or to a better person, then I think she did it through art. She didn't do it through religions. But she also did it by learning spiritual traditions, by experiencing spiritual traditions. She was an empirical researcher. She didn't study this stuff in the books like I have. She went there and did it. And so she had firsthand direct experience of all these different techniques that are spiritual. And so she knows how the impact that they have on her mind and her consciousness. So it's all firsthand stuff. And then she used it in her own performances. So as she progressed, she learned how to manipulate her consciousness and the consciousness of the audience. So then the consciousness becomes the object of her work, and it's both collective and individual. So that's why she's interesting in our circles, because what she worked with is consciousness, the body. So she affected consciousness through the body, which is, and of course, in the beginning, she did it with pain and suffering. But as she evolved, I think she left that concept. No, it's not a concept, but that method behind. And she moved closer to Vipassana techniques. And now she uses Vipassana techniques to transcend or to reach that state of consciousness, which allows for creativity, which was the other aspect of my research. How do spiritual practices open up creativity, and why? How does that work? You know, people talk about it, but then, you know, you have to teach them. If a method is valid, you only find out if you practice it and teach it. So it's very empirical. Her methodology, her approach is very empirical.
How much do you think, do you see anything of her grandmother's early initiation in her work? You haven't mentioned that. Her grandmother was not an Orthodox. She was Roman Catholic, was she?
No, I thought, no, I believe, no, she was Orthodox because
Serbian Orthodox, yeah.
Yeah, her grand uncle became the patriarch of the Orthodox religion in Yugoslavia before, obviously, Tito, and the king wanted him to merge to merge Catholicism and Orthodox religion into one, and he refused, and so the king assassinated him.
Right. Yes, that because so was much of that left, the Orthodox spirituality, or did she abandon? When you did the presentation, you implied that was quite an important formative influence on her. But when you go on in her life,
she does
more reference to it.
She talks about alternative spiritual systems, but she never talks about the Christian one.
Okay.
And it's not the Orthodox, it's any Christian tradition or denomination. She I don't know why.
Well, she would have. Yeah, do come in, Judith. Yes.
I was just going to say, I've read some of that autobiography, and she's very slight on explaining things or saying, well, it didn't really have very much influence on me. She's much more on the descriptive. I did this and I did that. And a lot of the things she did, it's not that she actively sought out stuff. It's that she kind of intuits it and kind of almost, well, if I'm helping Annalisa here, dreams her into the state, herself into the state, because she has the most extraordinary coincidences in her life, which you could never plan for or hope for even. Just amazing.
Can you give us one example, Judith?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, interestingly, when I read the thing about her birth and how her parents met, even how her parents met, was
extraordinary.
It was a story in itself, because help me, Annalisa,
I reread that chapter because of this talk. So her mother was a head nurse during the war, and so she collected, wounded soldiers and brought them to safety. But she caught typhus, and she basically passed out in the mud with all these corpses around her. And her father was passing by, literally.
They
and
hadn't met at that point, had they? No.
all he saw was her hair, a woman's hair, coming out of a coat, because she had a coat on top of her. If I remember correctly. And so he removed the coat, saw she was a woman, picked her up, and brought her to the hospital. And then she recovered, and she went back to war. And then sometime later, he was brought into her hospital, and he was dying because he lost too much blood. And she discovered, she recognized him, and she discovered that she had the same type of blood. So gave him her blood, and so he recovered. And because he was a philanderer, of course, and she was a good-looking woman, they fell in love or whatever, and then they got married after the war in 1945. And it is quite an extraordinary story.
Yeah, that he saved her and that then she saved him the
saved
other way
him.
around. Yeah.
But despite the beginning, then they were at each other's throat all the time, because he was such a womanizer.
He was worse than a womanizer. I mean, the story about him taking Marina as a child to a strip club when she was, was it about 7 or something ridiculous?
Yeah, she was very young.
It was just so totally inappropriate. But she loved him, and she, I don't know how to put it into words, but that primary bonding with this strong male figure, and she spent a lot of her time since looking for that and seeking that love and approval that she hasn't had from him.
Yeah, again, you can look at her work through a psychological lens, or Freudian lens even. I mean, you could completely rewrite her story based on her relationship with her parents. It was abhorrent. I mean,
well, as did that. I found that book in a charity shop. The one of the hang on.
Can I ask a question meanwhile? Do you know why she's using she was using the pentagram, this 5-pointed star?
she explained in the book, I think this happened, she explained it after she was accused of Satanism, from which she's defending herself. But she explained that she chose the star as a symbol of communism, but she was also aware that the star is a polysemic sign, and it's used in many other traditions, like, is it called Pentecost? Pentagram. So it's a symbol that recurs in many religious systems and cultural systems, and it can assume many different meanings. But for that particular performance, it was, because she did it in Belgrade, it was specifically a symbol of communism. I think it was a form of political, come si dice, criticism, or I don't know. It's
because at the same time women were doing were sort of creating pentagram as part of goddess art, in the 60s and 70s. So it's part of Wicca. It's just associated with goddess, and this is why. And well, I've seen it. I've seen the performance. I did see the performance in the past, and I remember it very vividly. I don't remember now, and but I remember that she cut herself on her I think it's a belly or something, or just underneath it. So it's very sexual as well. I mean, in where she decided to cut herself. So, you know, the reactions would be very divided, obviously, in terms of interpretations.
Can we just get Judith to show her the book?
Oh, right. Yeah. Can I? Well, I just got a thought as well, June, if I may. This shock horror thing, it really bothers me because the shock horror, which the lady who spoke, I'm not sure she's still here,
Yes.
but that troubles her and it troubles me. And the problem with it is that it has the same physiological reaction.
That's
Of what?
So that's why. So, for instance, self-flagellation is used sadly in Opus Dei, and they wear ligatures or something around their thighs, don't they? Which produces pain and suffering, and
Yeah.
Well, it's part of the Christian tradition.
Yeah.
yeah. But it bothers me that it's not nice. It's horrible. It's a desecration of life.
Yep.
Yeah. Sorry, it's made me feel emotional.
Oh.
But I mean, I can understand it, but it somehow just doesn't seem right. There's enough suffering, torment, pain, horror in the world without producing more gratuitously.
But it was part of the art tradition in drama as well, and the notion that what art should do is reflect the world back to itself, and that notion of having the terror of the world even worse on the stage. I can, like you, Judith, I can remember coming out of a play of that kind where there was cannibalism and it ended with a bound woman, a pregnant woman bound. And I said to the person who'd written it, "How dare you do it to us?" I don't, you know, and I had a huge rebellion against it, and I share that with you. So I think it's one way of looking at it. If one looks at the traditional shaman, there's not. I know that you're using a particular lens, but the notion of the shaman is to heal others, and I don't see that. The internal pain of the shaman in the traditional cultures being used in that sort of way. But I accept the frame that you're using. Esilit, you've come in. Did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah,
yes.
I did. I'm sorry.
Just a minute, Carol. I'll bring you in a minute.
Just to echo that, really, and it is part, I think, of the culture that's been in performance arts with these vehicles. And I work as an arts therapist, specialising in spiritual practice within arts therapy. I'm also a performance arts, you know, and I'm aware that as a therapist, some things that I would call abuse and self-harm are sort of accepted in the performance art world. I don't think so much of it probably happens now as back in the 70s. But I think, you know, we need to be aware of those sorts of cultural domains, you know, that it is part of, I suppose, the performance art tradition that Marina was part of. And I think, you know, like, you know, just to say to Judith, lots of people, myself included, have these feelings, you know, and it's you know, having studied performance art myself and been a practitioner, to make a conscious decision which aspects I particularly relate to as beneficial or spiritual or whatever, and to make those conscious decisions, really.
Thank you. Carol, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that what we're talking about is very much the same thing that Antonin Artaud was talking about with the theater of cruelty.
Exactly.
That's right, very much.
Exactly.
And also that there is, going back to the Slavic aspect of it, there's a lot of transgenerational catharsis that I suspect was going on between what she was doing and the response of her audience. So
Yeah.
fascinating work, though, just amazing. I don't like it much personally, but I get it. And it's very, very powerful for sure. So
Thank you. Judith.
My problem is that, as I understand it, doesn't it get you into the same psychophysiological state that could be considered transcendent, or I don't know how else to explain it.
Well, that was Antonina Artaud. Was his concept that through provocations and real sufferings, the audience and the actors are one, and they experience transcendence. Well, when I was in my 20s, I participated in Antonina Artaud's Theatre of Cruelty workshops in London. So, it was part of something that I went through, and in a way it was almost like a doctrine where you need to go against yourself. It's like, and it was really bad for me eventually. I became ill. Because well, I've learned the hard way that it doesn't work really. But I do understand that the idea of sufferings, because in a way, when she was talking about that artist, maybe she doesn't think like that now, but when she was thinking that artists need to suffer, when she was conveying the idea, I can understand it. I can understand why she was saying it, because sometimes there is this, if you suffer and you look at the others that don't suffer, so you want, it's like it's not as if you want, you want them to know what it means to suffer. So it's that particular angle, but I think there is, maybe her work is changing or has changed because of the way the world is now, because there's so much suffering that we are witnessing in the world at the moment, that maybe we don't really need to physically suffer so much if it's possible not to suffer, because I mean,
It was a huge debate in the world of music, really, and that, for example, John Tavener came in and said that suffering in music should never be expressed raw. It should always be refined. And he said it, yes, I've forgotten the word he used. He used words like consecrated before, and that it was too crude and not artistic, and it wasn't art if you expressed crude suffering in some way. And I think, but there are many people in the musical world, who would have said he was wrong. I mean, it was a hugely divisive debate in music, around, as you say, Artaud and co. I'm aware that we're getting near the end. You've put a slide up again.
I wanted to answer Judith's question. This is a part that I cut out from my presentation because it was getting too long. But it's the part where basically I try to not to explain, but speculate how these performances actually, why they work in terms of healing. And for that, we need to look at neuroscience and psychology rather than anthropology. And one of my sources is Lisa Miller's book, The Awakened Brain. And she studies the link between spirituality and depression. And one of the reasons why I'm thinking specifically about the artist is present and 512 hours, not her past performances. They might have a beneficial effect on participants, First of all, because they bring participants to the present moment. And this is, you know, what meditation does and mindfulness. So participating to her performances has the same effect as mindfulness participation or expressive arts. Then she mentions brain-to-brain coupling, which I think is what Judith was mentioning, which is when we see somebody in pain, the same neural paths are activated in our brain. And this is because of mirror neurons, but it's also what generates empathy between two people. So if you're not a sociopath and you see somebody in pain, you feel their pain in your mind, not necessarily physically, but certainly in your mind. And what she suggests is that perhaps, you know, when people spend time consoling somebody who is ill or sick in hospital, the mere fact of being there for them may relieve their pain, because they notice that when people are consoled by someone else, their physical signs of pain are reduced. So the sharing pain is actually reduces pain for the person who's suffering. And so that's what she was doing in The Artist is Present. When people broke into tears, they were bringing up their pain in front of her, and she was mirroring their pain by also, you know, crying for them. She felt their pain. Another interesting thing is synchronized alpha brainwaves. So when people participate in shared activities, their brainwaves synchronize, and that gives them a sense of unity. So that's a potential other reason why people have this feeling of communitas versus or feeling that they are connecting to each other. And then it's been proved that during practices, meditative practices or yoga or other group activities, mu opioids are produced by the brain. So this is a neuroscientific explanation, like a medical explanation, but I didn't include it in the presentation because I was running out of time.
But there are other things that do all of that. It isn't necessary to.
No,
but that's one. Judith, you haven't showed us your book.
Book.
Can you read the cover to us?
It says, psychoanalyst meets Marina Abramović, and that's the psychoanalyst. Jeanette Fischer, Fischer. And she says, doesn't she? I'm sure you've read this.
No, I didn't.
Did you not read it?
No, the psychoanalyst book? No.
Well, she's got a bit on melancholy in there. She says it's part of the process. It's part of the whatever process they do. So it's not Slavic. It's really Freudian.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. You've introduced the frame that Annalisa chose not to use, which would give you a very different view of Abramović, I'm sure, because if we look at one another through a variety of lenses, we will see different things about it. And thank you so much, Annalisa, for choosing the shamanic lens and giving us this insight into her. And I'm sure that many people who are here today will actually go away and look at her through their own lenses, the ones that they find easy, and they will find some of the things, as we've discussed, that are uplifting and healing, and others which are not. And that'll probably vary for all of us who are sitting here together. Thank you so much for your presentation. And thank you so much also for those who are present here for engaging so lively, in such a lively way with the debate. And I think, Annalisa, you probably have the next date in your mind, but also maybe you can circulate the list with all the details of the Abramović Festival, which many people may want to go. too in one. I have flicked through bits of it. Some of it, as you rightly said, is at the South Bank. Others are at various points. So it's quite complicated to find your way around all the things that are going on and so on. Can you give us the date of the next SASIG meeting?
We don't have one booked yet, because
Okay.
the next speaker should be Rina Aria. Which should be in October, but yeah, we haven't finalized the date.
No, okay. Well, I'm sure we shall see you all again, and we may see you at the exhibition, and we will certainly see you at the next gathering of SASIG. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you especially to you, Annalisa, for all the work.
Thank you, Annalisa. Lovely to see you all. Thank you.